Open channel leave. Welcome to Cocktails in Waverly's office. My name is Catherine.
And I'm Hannah.
And I'm Logan.
And today we will be discussing 2 episodes, but not in the right order as we are used to, because we decided to leave the Mad Mad Tea Party affair for its own episode. Today we will be talking about the Yellow Scarf affair and the Secret Scepter affair.
Okay, so the Yellow Scarf affair, to me, it was not the strongest episode. It felt like there were a whole bunch of threads going all sorts of places that I expected to be tied at the end, but they just weren't.
Yes.
Yeah. So if, Hannah, you want to try to summarize it as best as you can, that'd be good.
Nobody else can.
So the Yellow Scarf affair, firstly, it's the last Napoleon-only episode for a really long time. So a bunch of the season 1 episodes are Napoleon only, before Man from U.N.C.L.E. really became the Men from U.N.C.L.E. And the next time we have a Napoleon only episode, I believe it is when Ilya is David McCallum was on a Girl from U.N.C.L.E. episode, correct?
Yeah.
So that's pretty far into the series. That's, I think, in season 3. So we have about a season before we get another Napoleon only episode. But unfortunately, that does not mean that this is an episode that goes back to the show's, first couple episodes, real spy roots. Instead, we get this really bizarre, disjointed story where we have a thrush problem, and we have a problem with the thuggy cult who worship Kali in India. And it really seems like at some point you're going to find out that Thrush is somehow behind all of this, but they're not. It's just 2 totally unrelated things happening at once, and it doesn't really matter. So the basic plot of the Yellow Scarf affair is that at the beginning of the episode, Napoleon is asked by Waverly to go to pick up a suitcase from another U.N.C.L.E. agent. And the suitcase has some kind of super specific, hyper well-working lie detector in it. But unfortunately, the guy who works for U.N.C.L.E., who is holding the suitcase, ends up getting on an airplane that is taken over by thuggy cultists, and they crash the plane, and this U.N.C.L.E. agent dies. So, in order for Napoleon to be able to get this lie detector that they don't want to fall into Thrush's hands, he needs to go to India to be able to sort through the wreckage of the airplane. And while he's there, he kind of ends up butting heads with this Thrush agent named Simpson, who is, they're both simultaneously posing as insurance agents trying to sort through the airplane wreckage. And Simpson is an interesting character who we'll definitely end up talking about, but, again, there really seems like there should be some kind of crossover between these 2 events, and, while Simpson and Napoleon are sorting through the wreckage and, being very cagey about what they're looking for, and clearly they're both looking for the lie detector, Napoleon finds a piece of a yellow scarf, which was used to strangle the U.N.C.L.E. agent who was on the airplane, which frankly was very stupid because the airplane was crashed anyway, so, why did you need to strangle him? They were all gonna die. You didn't need to kill him twice. But so he finds this piece of yellow scarf, and one of the passing airline workers just goes, "Oh, Kali," as Napoleon pulls out this yellow scarf, and they end up having a conversation about how this yellow scarf is the trademark of the thuggy cult who used to attack travelers on the roads in India and rob them. And so there is an implication that this cult has returned to India and is doing the same thing, but they're doing it in a, 20th century way, and instead of robbing, carts on the road, they're robbing planes. And so ultimately, what ends up happening is Napoleon talks to one of the airline workers, Deirdre, who is, she was supposed to be on the plane, and was pulled off at the last moment, and so she feels like she cheated death, but she also was the one who sold the uncle agent the ticket, so she feels really bad about that. And so she gives Napoleon some of the background information that he needs, and then for some reason she also turns out to be the niece of a Maharaja, but the Maharaja's like a displaced Maharaja. He's not doing any king-ing anymore. Like, he's just a rich guy in a palace now.
Yeah, they say something about it like being like India being a republic now or something along those lines.
Yeah, and so I don't know. It's one of those things that's like actually too close to real history for it to make sense. Because it's like, well, who is this Maharaja guy? Like, is he supposed to be some real world figure, or are we pretending that we just know nothing about India?
I guess it's like if it was a random English lord. Like, you know.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess that's really what it is. Mm-hmm. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff where Napoleon is pulled in various directions investigating this crime, and he ends up under house arrest at a hotel for a period of time, and he hits on this woman who works for the airline and who is also the niece of a Maharaja, and he gets in a fight with Simpson, the thrush agent, and he ends up finding a dead lady who could have identified the people who were on the plane in a bathtub. And, like, it's all just kind of, like, the wheels of the episode are spinning and not going anywhere. And then near the end, we have a whole sort of showdown where part of the problem is that Deirdre also could recognize the person who is supposed to get on the plane who is pulled off, and also she could recognize the woman who had been supposedly on the plane but mysteriously wasn't dead, because there's two people who were on the plane but somehow didn't die. And, I mean, those are the people who are in the Thuggy cult. And it turns out in the end that basically her uncle, the Maharaja, has been the one who's been funding the cult from the beginning, and basically he just wants to return India to the days of, I don't even know, they don't give like a specific time period, he just hates modernization. And then in the end of the episode, the Maharaja is dealt with, and then Napoleon gets the lie detector, which happened to fall into the hands of the Maharaja kind of by accident, and he gets on a plane home, and the thrush agent shows up at the airport and is like, "Hi, can I have your lie detector?" And Napoleon's like, "No, go to jail," and then he does. It's not a great episode.
Yeah.
Okay. Honestly, like, Simpson was the best part. Like,
easily.
he was very entertaining.
I agree.
So, Simpson, the first time we see him, he and Napoleon are both posing as insurance agents, and it's very interesting because, first off, Napoleon's card says he's part of the United Northern Casualty and Liability Exchange, which is to say he's from Uncle. And he and Simpson are both kind of pretending they're insurance agents, even though they clearly both know they're, like, an uncle agent and a thrush agent. And, like, all of a sudden, Simpson gets kind of, like, not exactly flirty, but he's, like, way too close to Napoleon. He's being really friendly. And we've decided that Simpson has heard a rumor that thrush agents often end up sleeping with Napoleon solo, and he's like, oh boy, Simpson, you got it this time! And the answer to that is actually he's like the first person ever who isn't Napoleon's type.
I know. Yeah, because, you know, actually, I was thinking that, like, he would totally, like, there totally would be more, like, they'd be totally shippable, but it seems very one-sided.
Yeah. It was very funny because, like, there are so many scenes in which it's very hard to read them as anything but gay.
Yeah.
There's a whole sequence where Simpson comes into Napoleon's room when he's under house arrest at the hotel, and he sits on the side of Napoleon's bed and kind of like tucks one foot under his butt and like brings his knee up to his chin and like rests his chin on the knee, and it's just such a like coquettish pose. Like he's just like, oh no, I'm sitting on your bed, look how cute I am. And Napoleon's like, can I get out of this hotel room? I'm really tired of being in this hotel room.
You know, I think I have a theory as to why Napoleon's not into him. I think that Napoleon likes the thrush agents that are a bit more hard to get, and like Simpson's just putting himself right in front of her, like, look at me, come and sleep with me. And I guess it's just too upfront for Napoleon. Like, he's not into that. That ruins the fun of sleeping with thrush agents.
And he also likes when people are actually threatening, and Simpson is like a puppy.
Yeah.
He's a puppy.
Yeah, he's easily the least threatening thrush agent ever. Like, he just is like, hey buddy Napoleon, do you wanna help me with my thrush mission? And Napoleon's like, no, why would I do that?
Yeah. And like it's really weird, like even though like he seems to be like probably around the same age as Napoleon, he calls Napoleon his old man, which is like something an old term for like a dad. And like I guess maybe he's into that, but I'm just kind of like, why?
Wait, does he call him old man or old boy? I thought it was like a Gatsby thing.
No, he actually says old man twice. Like the old term for a dad.
I'm never thinking. Wow.
Well, if I were Napoleon, that might also put me off of Simpson.
Yeah.
And then also, like, in addition to him being like weird like that, like and weirdly puppy like when like he brings in some curry for Napoleon, and he says, curry for breakfast, pretty hard on the tum-tum, and then like kind of like pokes like Napoleon's belly with his fist. It's not really a punch, it's just, and I'm like, he literally said he's literally called Napoleon's stomach a tum-tum, like like this is like a 30-year-old man.
Yeah. There's even a point where Napoleon lampshades it, because when Simpson actually does come up and sit on his bed, he also like fixes his bedpost in a really like weirdly homoerotic way. So like the bedpost on Napoleon's bed falls off in a fight, and Simpson like picks it up and like very gently twists it back on in a very knob stroking kind of way. And after he does this, Napoleon says something along the lines of, "What, you just came up here to make sure I got home all right?" And it's like such a, well, that's a, you know, set phrase for like a woman being walked home by a man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like I really think they're going for like he totally gives me like 60s gay coded villain vibes, like totally.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Although actually it's weird because like he has 60s gay coded villain vibes, but at the same time he's so incredibly non-threatening.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I don't know why, but I'm imagining him like back at his like apartment, maybe having like a Napoleon solo shrine.
No! I could 100% see. So we were joking earlier that the thrush agents basically like they all know that, you know, like, hey, if you're looking to sleep with an uncle agent, like, go for Napoleon solo. And, you know, that it's a well-known thing, so, you know, Simpson thinks that this is going to be his lucky day, but that there's a betting pool for Thrush agents who, you know, try to see who can finally bag Ilya. The answer is no one. No one on Thrush can bag Ilya.
Yeah, like Ilya's not gonna fall for the Thrush trap, but Napoleon, oh yeah.
See, I feel like Napoleon doesn't even fall for the Thrush trap. He just is, like, so self-assured that he's just like, this is fine. I 100% can just sleep with this evil person, and it's not a problem.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and Lydia's reaction is like, what?
Why would you do that?
Yeah.
Simpson also touched Napoleon's back in one scene. Like, I remember that, and I just was like, oh. And it wasn't like a pat on the back in like a bro-y way. It was like kind of like going around and like, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, I feel kind of sorry for Simpson because in a way he actually, like, when Napoleon got caught by the Sagi, Simpson came to the place as well, and he kind of postponed his killing, I guess. Yeah. So, I mean, Napoleon was very rude to him. I know that he's a Thrush agent.
It kind of seems like, though, he's a Thrush agent who, like, if Napoleon had just been nice to him, like, he could have just been like, do you want to join Uncle? And Simpson would have been like, sure.
Yeah.
And instead, Napoleon was like, this guy's really annoying.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I have it written down. I remember, like, I laughed so hard when Simpson just was like, hey, Mr. Solo! Probably the mic exploded at that, but whatever.
I wrote that down, too. He's just so excited to see him at every scene they're in. It's very sad. Poor Simpson.
I felt legitimately bad when he came to, like, rescue Napoleon, I guess, and Napoleon just knocked him out.
Yup. Like, I feel like, you know, we kind of know that Napoleon is actually a little bit of a sleazebag, but, like, this episode is definitely like, no, Napoleon can be a real dick.
Yeah.
But, like, I mean, we all know that Simpson is a Thrush agent, and Thrush is basically, like, the most evil organization on the planet, I guess. But, at the same time, he deserved better.
Yeah.
I hope we're encouraging everyone who's listening to go write Simpson fanfic.
Yeah. Oh man, I was gonna make this joke, but it'll date this podcast to 2020 so much. Should I do it anyways?
Yeah.
You say Simpson is a simp for Napoleon? If you're listening to this like 20 years from now for some reason, like, yeah, that'll just make this podcast so dated.
I mean, the fact that in our, like, last spring episodes, we talked repeatedly about the fact that I might have had COVID. That dates it to 2022.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's no escaping that.
No, I just had to say it. Simpson is a simp. He's a Simpson.
I appreciate it. I think that's fun.
Yeah. Well, now we should talk about the rest of the episode.
There's so little to talk about for the rest of the episode.
Yeah. I would like to talk about casting and stuff, but first I would like to mention the uncle agent who was an old lady really like very cute glasses.
Yes, I loved her. I wrote that down also in my notes. So the episode actually opens with a lady in a big sunbonnet and a man with the world's worst Irish accent meeting over like crossword puzzles, and that's their like uncle code for switching this suitcase. And so one of the uncle agents is like an older woman, which is really cool because even now in most media, older women don't ever actually get to do like fun things in media. They just get to be moms.
Yes, it was very interesting and subversive. And at the same time, I think McAllister was supposed to be Scottish, I guess, because he mentioned
Okay, world's worst Scottish accent then.
Yeah, I thought he was Scottish too. But the accents are both Gaelic derived, so I see where it comes from.
It's my own Irish bias.
Yeah. Yeah, I for the fun of it, because his name is Duncan McAllister. Yeah. He wears this ring that has his family crest on it. That's like crucial for the plot. And I actually, for the fun of it, I googled Clan McAllister to see if the crest actually matched up with the ring, and of course it doesn't.
Yeah,
sure. So how badly did they mess up? Was it close or like?
It was really bad. Like it was like complete. Like it didn't even have like the same like charge on it or anything. It's like a completely different thing. So they didn't even try.
Yeah,
that's not shocking.
The Man from U.N.C.L.E. is basically a fantasy universe.
Yeah.
That is entertaining, though.
Yeah, it's always fun nitpicking these little things that, of course, Uncle will never get right. Like, not Uncle, the creators would never get right, because it's just such small things, and, like, it'd be so hard to find that information in the 60s, but I'm like, you never know. Maybe they went really hard into it.
Well, there's also always the possibility that things like that are, like, references, and so if someone was actually a McAllister who, like, worked on the show, they could have potentially known. So you never know with things like that. They could be correct.
True. So it's always fun to see, and it was not.
Okay, so I have this, even though Hannah described the plot to me, I still don't understand
Yeah, me neither.
I think much like, was it, oh god, what's the other one we were like, the plot makes no sense?
King of Knaves.
Was it King of Knaves?
I think it was.
I thought it was one of the ones written by Caillou.
The hetero guy.
Yes, the hetero guy. But also, the particular episode was the one where they, like, go to some island, and they go there because they're like, no one will try to kill us there, and then immediately they try to kill them, like, in the square. Gioco Piano, yes.
Yeah.
So, Gioco Piano was a similar one where it's just like, there was a lot of stuff happening and I don't know why it was happening.
Yeah, but also, when we were discussing King of Knaves, we actually spent half an hour on just describing the plot. Because it made so little sense as well.
So apparently this is more of a recurring problem than I remember it being.
Yeah. Well, like, let's be real, it's mostly an action show, so basically you're supposed to watch it without thinking, I guess.
Yeah. Also another thing where you try to watch without thinking. Like, I noticed that after, like, Napoleon gave his, like, knockout punch to Simpson, because, like, in this universe, in the Man from U.N.C.L.E. universe, you can just hit someone with a single hit and they get knocked out and they're unconscious. Napoleon, like, took Simpson's clothes and put his suit on Simpson, and then, like, Napoleon walked out in his disguise as Simpson, basically. But Simpson was wearing, like, traditional, like, Indian clothes. But then, it's pretty distinctive. But then in the next scene, Napoleon's back in a different suit. So, like, did Napoleon, like, stop by the local Uncle branch and be like, hey, do you have any spare suits? And because Uncle is always prepared for this sort of thing, they're like, of course, Napoleon, here you go.
That's how he brought in the downfall of Uncle. So, like, I want to ask you about what you think about the whole thing about the airplane crash, because basically the Thagis, they were supposed
I think they parachuted.
to visit. Oh, what?
You just disappeared for a second.
You disappeared.
Ah, yeah. Okay. So, basically later there was a scene in which Thrush tries to kill Napoleon, and they seem to be working in cahoots with the Maharaja, and it's kind of weird because, like, were they working together all the time or not? I don't understand.
I don't think they were. Because there does not seem to be any indication that, like, Simpson knew anything about what was going on with the Thuggee, and also the Maharaja seems to be equally surprised that Simpson is trying to steal the briefcase in the scene where they're all in his, like, ill-gotten gains room.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's a moment where, like, Thrush and the cult have the same goal, but I don't actually think they're really working together.
Yeah, basically there was, like, a very funny scene in which Simpson put a thrush bird on Napoleon's back. I don't know, it was some kind of a, like, picture that was glowing in the dark but wasn't visible in the light.
It's only visible under infrared light.
Which, you know, you can 100% like shine like a flashlight with a gun.
Yeah, and then later Napoleon goes to visit the Maharaja in his palace, and Thrush is waiting for him to go.
Yeah, I think that it's a coincidence that it's at the Maharaja's mansion. Like, I think that the guy who's doing the shooting just happens to be a Thrush guy who is Indian. or actually, I'm not even, no, you know what? The guy who's doing the shooting isn't actually Thrush. He's like a hired gun.
But he had a Thrush rifle and he was looking for the Thrush side, so...
Yeah, I think the implication, because there's a scene where he and Simpson are talking, and Simpson like tells him his whatchamahoozy, his orders, and he specifically says something like, "Don't shoot until you see the bird," and I feel like that's a weird thing to say to someone who is a Thrush member. He says something along the lines of, like, don't shoot until the bird is, like, perfectly in your sights. And I feel like the way he phrases it does not sound like information you would give to someone who's part of your organization. It sounds like information that you would give to someone who doesn't, like, know what this bird really means.
Mm-hmm. Maybe, yes. It's an interesting point. But,
however, I think mostly this episode is just full of plot holes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like, we're trying so hard to analyze this, and I'm not sure if it's even worth analyzing.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, for me, that scene was especially funny because Napoleon basically he finds a dead parrot. And he...
Oh my god, the parrot was so weird.
He takes him up of his... what's it called? Like...
Yeah, so, like, okay, like, it's really weird. There was, like, maybe, like, a taxidermy parrot, like, that's what I think, that was, like, on, like, this fake perch, and then, like, Napoleon just takes the parrot off and then just shoves it under a couch, and then takes off his suit jacket and puts it on the perch, and then, like, wheels it out into the hallway, and then for some reason, like, the thrush person with, like, the gun, like, thinks that it's a real human being and then shoots
it. Yeah.
I'm like, the only thing that I could think about this whole thing was this bird is no more.
But, like, now I'm thinking, like, what if the person shooting didn't even know what the thrush bird looked like, so you just could wheel out the bird on the perch and then you just shoot that?
Or, like, a bird is actually, like, used to describe women sometimes, like...
That's true.
Yeah.
So Simpson says to this stranger who, is in another country and probably speaks English as a second language, shoot the bird! And those are the only instructions he gives him. And this guy's like, okay, buddy. I mean, you're paying me.
Also, like, obviously, Logan hasn't seen a lot of Monty Python.
Yeah, I've only seen the Holy Grail. That's it.
Yeah. There was this like iconic sketch about a dead parrot. You should watch it. Because...
Yeah, look up Dead Parrot Monty Python. You won't regret it. There's a lot of stuff actually that's happening in this episode in terms of set dressing that's very strange. Like the parrot is really weird, but there's some other stuff that happens that I wrote down too that I was like, why? So, like, the fact that in the scene where they fight in Napoleon's hotel room, like, why does the bed break? Like, why is that a thing? And then Simpson fixes it and it's like it's not important. Like, it's just like, oh, we broke a prop and one of the actors fixed it. And then, like, there's a scene where Deirdre, Napoleon gets trapped in the Maharaja's cage, I guess, in his throne room. And when Deirdre comes and finds him, she's like, oh, this has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's like a modern jail. Like, it's steel. It's steel bars. It's like, this has not been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, Deirdre. Someone installed this last week.
Yeah.
And then in the part where, so one of the thuggy cult members, one of the people who was on the airplane, the two that parachuted off, one's a man and one's a woman, and the woman ends up getting killed, and she's killed while she's taking a shower, and Napoleon starts to figure out something's wrong because he's like, wait a minute, she's been running the shower for a really long time, and he goes into the bathroom and finds her dead, and I swear to God the bathroom was carpeted. And
God.
it's just the full of weird details like that in this episode that I was like, why? Why are they saying these things and doing these things? Like, why are they not thinking this through?
Oh yeah, and also that woman, like, before she died, like, didn't, like, Napoleon come in and talk to her while she was taking a bath? And then, you don't see her in the bath, but, like, she literally is, like, wearing a bathrobe, and she's like, why did you come in here while I'm taking a bath? So, like, literally, like, did Napoleon just, like, break into her hotel room and while she's in the bath and be like, hey, I want to talk to you, and then she has to, like, get her bathrobe on?
I think yes, because also there's a character who appears very briefly whose name is, like, literally given as, like, the commandant or the colonel, something like that, and he seems to be her boyfriend, and he's very upset about Napoleon being in her room.
Yeah.
And, like, it's weird because I also don't get if she was involved with the whole Sagi thing. I mean, so it was on the plane and she didn't die. and she was, I guess, a villain, but also she dated the inspector. Like, what was her position? Why was she in the restaurant when Napoleon was there? Why was she like flashing? I mean, she was like, "Hello, I'm here. I'm alive."
Yeah, there's also just a lot of weird, and I'm making air quotes no one can see right now, coincidences that occur in this episode, like the inspector and the murdering woman and Napoleon all being in the same, they somehow all stumbled into the same, bar in India.
Yeah.
India's a big country. And yeah, it just seems really strange that, if I were someone who had just murdered a bunch of people on an airplane, I would not then be like, actually, despite the fact that you knew I was on that airplane and I should be dead, I'm just gonna go to all my local haunts and see my boyfriend in the town that I usually live in.
Yeah.
Guess what? Not dead, y'all!
Yeah, so basically the plot doesn't make any sense.
No.
At all.
Yeah, as previously stated, bad episode.
Yeah, and I also wanted to talk about casting in this episode because it's very mixed, and they tried but not hard enough, obviously, because they did cast some actual Indian people, but also the woman who played Sita, her name is, I don't know how it's pronounced, Neely or Neil Adams, and she was actually
Nellie or Nell.
No, it's not Nellie. I looked it up too, and I'm not sure how it would be pronounced either.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So basically, she was the wife of Steve McQueen at the time.
She, I think if I'm remembering correctly, she was apparently, I think she was Filipina? And
actually,
that's not the same as Indian.
Yeah, I'm looking at her IMDb page now, and she was very mixed race, but at the same time, she had zero Indian heritage.
Yeah.
Basically, it's pretty confusing to me because, I mean, I know that Americans and British confuse Asian people all the time. because Indians are also considered Asian in America and the UK, but in Russia, at school we were taught that Indians are actually ethnically closer to Europeans because they have the same ancestry basically. So that's why for me it's almost impossible to confuse Indian people with other Asian people like Chinese or Japanese because we are pretty genetically different from each other. I mean, and it's very obvious when you look at Indian people and other Asian people because they have completely different face structures and stuff. And so, for me, when I see people of other Asian ethnicities play Indian characters, it's very weird because they look very different.
Meanwhile, here in the United States is if they're brown, they're Indian. No.
that I think. Well, it's a little thinking about original Star Trek. They cast a Hispanic man as Khan.
Yeah, but
they very specifically describe as being mixed race, but mostly from the Indian subcontinent. And I do think that unfortunately there was a very strong tendency in the 60s especially to be like, well, we're doing a good job. We didn't just cast a white person in brownface.
yeah, but also that they did like cast white actor as the inspector, and I'm not sure about Maharaja either.
The Maharaja is definitely a white guy.
The reason why I remember Inspector specifically is because he appeared in many other episodes of The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and like
Yeah.
he played a Greek man, a Tibetan man.
Yeah.
He played everyone.
I mean, I can't speak for the British, but I mean, when you think about America, you have to remember that we still, in some parts of this country, teach our children that the people who lived in America before white European invaders came, they literally still sometimes refer to them as Indians. So, like, we really, like, as a country, we do not do a very good job of teaching the fact that racial differences do exist and that that's okay. Because if we teach about it at all, we pretend that, like, oh, everybody's exactly the same inside and out. And mostly we just don't talk about it at all.
Yeah,
the Great American Melting Pot.
Yeah.
Like, calling Native American people Indian is very inaccurate, obviously.
Yep.
Especially as they're closer to actual, like, other Asian people, like East Asian people.
Yeah, it's just, oh my god. You know how annoying it can be in conversation, too? Like, literally, like, if you say something like Indian music, different people could have very different images, and it's so annoying.
There was a pretty good movie called The Fall in 2000, and it was about a girl who actually wasn't American. I think she was like from Eastern Europe or something. She made a friend, a white man who was telling her a story about like various adventures, and the movie it tells. It shows how her imagination made the story look, and he had an Indian man in in this story, and he obviously meant a Native American, but in her imagination, he was an actual Indian man.
Yep.
We should get back to the Man from U.N.C.L.E. I think we're running out of things to talk about with the yellow scarf.
Yeah.
So maybe we should
For me, it's interesting. At the same time, I know a couple of Indian people in the U.N.C.L.E fandom, and both of them have very different opinions on this episode. One of them found it very insulting, and I get why, because actually, Slagi is like, if you said that Americans were still cowboys, you know?
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I found the whole plot with the Thuggee cult very, like, okay, I get it. Someone thought they came up with something very clever, but it really is not.
Yeah.
And, like, there is one thing that I did find very interesting about this episode, not necessarily in a good way, the character who I've been referring to as Deirdre, there's a point at which the Maharaja refers to her as Indra, and he talks about the fact that, well, she's modern, and so she's changed her name to be a Western name.
Yeah.
And there's this very interesting and somewhat disturbing implication that, like, yes, of course, India is a modern country. It is not full of superstition and blah, blah, blah. And the reason it's a modern country is because it's westernizing.
Yeah.
And, like, this idea that, like, the only way to be, quote, modern is to embrace colonialism and to embrace whiteness.
Yes.
And so I can totally understand why this episode could... I mean, it is offensive. It's an offensive episode.
Yeah.
There's parts of it that just are like, oh, that's unfortunate and has aged very poorly.
Yeah, and also, like, Maharaji is explicitly called, like, old-fashioned, and she says that he lives in the past, and basically that's why he's a bad guy, I guess.
Yup. Yeah, they directly associate the fact that he cares about his country's cultural traditions with being evil. It's like, the man isn't trying to, you know, like, okay, the one thing he picks that he really wants to, you know, bring into the modern era is a cult that murders people, rather than, you know, like, a traditional dance form, or, like... you know, anything that someone who cares about their country's culture might actually care about.
Well, it's also interesting that they brought up Kali, because if you remember the Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's pretty much like the same shit.
Yep. Pro tip, it's offensive in that too.
Yeah, but also it sort of puts into a perspective, because the Raiders of the Lost Ark came out later, and it was a major, like, motion picture production, while The Man from U.N.C.L.E. was, like, in the 60s, and it was a TV show. And it doesn't make these things more excusable, but, like, it shows that it was very prominent. And I mean, I could think of more examples, like Help. If you have seen Help.
Yep.
With the Beatles. Yeah. So basically, it was like a major feature of the time, I would say, probably, because it was the time when India just lost British control officially, and I guess not everybody was happy about it.
Yeah, definitely.
So basically, I guess it concludes our conversation on the yellow scarf.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it kind of sounds like I was changing the topic earlier, but I think you still made some really good points. I didn't mean to, like, diminish that, so...
No worries.
I also get that it's a pretty difficult conversation to have. Because...
Yeah, I just thought we already had wrapped it up, but, like, we still went on, and it's all good, but now I think we can move on to the Scepter.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
So, basically, the Scepter affair is also pretty offensive.
The secret Scepter affair. Oh, the offensive double feature.
Yeah. The Secret Scepter affair, I feel like at least manages to... I mean, at least Secret Scepter affair, the bad guy's a white guy.
Yes, and it's a very interesting point, because I thought about it yesterday when I was watching it, because, I mean, let's first summarize the plot, and then later we will discuss it.
Yeah. So, the Secret Scepter affair, I actually, I have a soft spot for this episode, because this episode begins with Ilya and Napoleon going to an unnamed Middle Eastern country, as they do sometimes. And in this unnamed Middle Eastern country, it turns out that Napoleon has decided he's going to help his old commanding officer from the Korean War, which is really interesting, partially just because we get so little of Napoleon and Ilya's backstories, like, textually in the episodes, that it is really interesting that, like, it's confirming that, like, idea that, okay, so Napoleon is a Korean War vet, and, like, he was involved in this. And so they go to help his commanding officer because the commanding officer has basically put out a call for help to U.N.C.L.E, knowing that Napoleon works there, and has said, there are people who are working to try to undermine democracy in this country where I've lived for the past many years. And I want to make sure that that doesn't happen because we fought so hard to make this country a democracy. And Napoleon brings this up sometime before the episode begins to probably Waverly or someone else at U.N.C.L.E, and he's turned down. And so Napoleon actually goes on his own. This is not an U.N.C.L.E mission to this country to help his commanding officer, and for absolutely no reason, Ilya comes too.
I thought U.N.C.L.E was said that they could go as long as they only use sleep darts and not actual guns.
But it's not like an actual U.N.C.L.E sanctioned mission.
Yeah,
true. So they were given permission to go, but it sounds like they're being given permission to go almost more on a personal. Yeah. So you can go, but don't kill anyone while you're there.
Yeah. And Napoleon said something about Ilya just being along for the ride. And just okay.
And I swear to God, based on Ilya's affect throughout this entire episode, that Napoleon told him they were going on vacation. Because Ilya is so done this whole episode. He just is I hate everything. We'll talk about that too, because it's great. Yeah. But so anyway, they get to this unnamed Middle Eastern country, and the commander talks about the fact that basically the man who just recently won the election in this country, and it was it was the first fair election they've ever held, he's gonna get this scepter that somehow is gonna convince everyone to let him be dictator for life, which makes no sense. And Napoleon and Ilya actually do question that. They're how will having a scepter make this man dictator for life? And the commanding officer is well, it's because all of the hills people in this country are so superstitious that they'll see someone with this scepter and just be oh, you're the king forever now. And they also question, well, if this guy just won a democratic election, why does he want to all of a sudden be dictator forever when, he has not even served out his first term? And the guy's he just does, okay? And so anyway, they go to investigate this scepter, and they go to investigate what's happening with the current president. And basically, the commanding officer asks Napoleon and Ilya to smuggle the scepter out of the country, pretending it is a tennis racket. And so they wrap it up in a tennis racket case, and he tells them to meet him in, I think, Marseille, and in France, and that he'll take the scepter then, and that it'll be out of anyone's hands who could use it for bad, and so on and so forth. But what ends up happening is, as the commander flies away in his helicopter, the helicopter explodes. And so the implication is that the commanding officer has been killed by the evil forces in this country, and the scepter ends up with Napoleon and Ziya, is that her name?
Yeah.
And Ziya, who is the commanding officer's right-hand woman, and they end up getting chased around by the people who are supposedly looking for the scepter. And what ends up happening is that Ilya gets captured, and Napoleon and Ziya have to hide the scepter. And then Napoleon wants to go back for Ilya, because of course he does. And then there's a whole exchange where we find out that essentially it's not actually the president of the country who is doing the subterfuge and the wanting the scepter, it's his mom. So he has an evil mom who is "Wah-ha-ha-ha-ha, my son is the democratically elected leader of this country, but soon I will make sure that he's always king forever, and I will rule from behind the scenes. And, the guy who's been elected is actually an okay guy. He's not the problem. And so, anyway, long story short, after a lot of fighting of bears and running through the desert and hiding things in tennis cases and in the grill of cars and getting kidnapped and unkidnapped, etc. They open up the scepter because they discover that it has like a screw top, because, you know, all scepters have screw tops, right? Because you can use them to tipple. And it's full of diamonds and rubies and emeralds and sapphires, and Napoleon comes to the realization, although this is not stated directly at this point in the episode, that his commanding officer has been playing him, and that actually he just wanted him to help him smuggle jewels out of the country. So anyway, they do end up meeting him in France, and the commanding officer is like, ha ha ha, so you knew that I was still alive? And Napoleon's like, yup, and also smuggling jewels. And they have a conversation about his philosophy and how did he go from being a good man to a bad man, and blah, blah, blah. And then he dies. And then the episode kind of more or less ends. So, like, again, plot-wise, not great. There's a lot of stuff that happens in this episode that is also just kind of like random wheel spinning. Like the entire sequence with the bear is just so weird.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of going back and forth. Like there's a whole sequence where they rent a car from a guy and like it secretly has an X on the top of it. And, like that's being used to like, you know, get them arrested, and then, you know, they get back into the car later and they have to peel the X off the top, and they're like, I wonder how we got caught, and then they're like, oh wait, it was probably that guy we rented the car from. It's all just kind of like, stuff is happening to fill up the time. But It is an enjoyable episode, mostly because of Napoleon and Ilya, and mostly because of Ilya being like, you promised me a vacation.
Yeah. I have to say, this episode has one of my favorite Ilya quotes of all time.
Yeah.
He says, a man must die a little every day.
I feel like it's extremely important to put this in context, too. Because the commanding officer asks, basically, why did you bring this other guy along? And that's when Napoleon says he's just along for the ride. And Ilya's response to that is, it is inevitable. A man must die a little bit every day. So, literally, this is how this conversation goes. Why are you here? Sometimes you just gotta die. What? Like, I get you're trying to go for, you know, like, the Russian, you know, gallows humor here, Ilya, but, like, okay, that's going a little far. You didn't answer the man's question.
Yeah.
Ilya's just being gothic.
Yep. Ilya's a goth.
Napoleon's a prep.
I mean, like, he did wear, like, an all-black, like, jacket, pants, and turtleneck in one scene, so, like, maybe he is feeling goth.
But enough of my moral for today. Yeah, I got to say that I actually started appreciating the plot more as I watched it, because it had all the clues that the colonel was trying to, I guess, play Napoleon, because when they first arrived to this country, they're immediately attacked by some guys, and they don't even know who attacked them. And after they leave, the guys who attack them just like good play.
Yeah. So this is another one actually that my husband watched along with me, and as we were watching it, he just was like, why are they laughing?
Yeah.
Why are they laughing?
It was
really
an interesting
bothered
detail.
by that.
Yeah. And also, like, I always try to give female character a benefit of the doubt, because I know that they are often written pretty poorly, and like, it doesn't mean that they are themselves bad and stuff, but I got to say that I absolutely hated the actress who played Ziya.
she.
And at the same time, it's implied that she is so loyal to the colonel that she's basically like in love with him, I guess. And it makes sense why she wouldn't see him like lying to her, because she's not very clever. Probably.
Yeah. I feel like Ziya should be an interesting character because she's like a lady freedom fighter, and like there's a whole thing about how like she's a super reckless driver, and she's like the second person in charge of this like militia, but her character mostly is like she screams a lot and trusts people who are super untrustworthy. And I think
at the same time, like, her actress is pretty weak. I guess she has like vibes of being a supermodel who was cast just to look pretty, I guess.
I don't know. Like that plus the fact that her whole sort of like worship of the colonel is that ties into what we were getting at earlier with the idea that this is unfortunately another offensive episode. So aside from the fact that we have more brown face in this episode and more sort of like terrible monarchs in countries with majority non-white people, there's also just this whole issue with Ziya being obsessed with the colonel and the idea that like she thinks that this white man fixed her country. And there's very much there's a white savior narrative that's going on in this episode that they don't really do anything to unpack until the very end. And what they do at the very end actually is really interesting, but it's not enough.
I mean, like, if we look at the subtext of the episode, it's pretty good. Like, the colonel was actually trying to rob these people, and pretty much nothing else. And it's, I guess, implied that this revolution that happened in that country was supported by the USA, which absolutely was a thing that happened back then, because I mean, we all know history, right? And the implication that basically the USA got into this conflict only to enrich themselves is pretty interesting, you know? And it being Napoleon's ex-superior is very interesting as well, because it puts into question the Korean War as well.
Agreed.
Like, why was he involved in it? What did he gain from it and stuff? And
this has like great fic potential for Napoleon being angsty.
Yeah, I agree. And at the same time, this guy is obviously very good at gaining people's trust, because, well, he's like a professional in it, I guess. He helped support the revolution. He had a lot of loyal people to him, including Napoleon. And I guess we could say that Napoleon is pretty idealistic, and that's why he didn't see who he really was, I guess. So it's a very interesting episode in this aspect. But at the same time, for the most part of the episode, I guess we think that the colonel is a good guy. But at the same time, there are enough clues to kind of like guess that maybe he's not that good. So this episode made me really think about how the Man from U.N.C.L.E was pretty political at times, and it was interesting. So while this episode is problematic, I still have a very soft spot for it, because it's politically very interesting.
I would agree with that. And I feel like the fact that... So the Colonel, when they find him at the end and he's not dead, Napoleon is really clearly very hurt by the fact that he did all of this, and he questions it, and he talks about, when I knew you, you were a good man. And the Colonel's response is to say that basically he's been involved in war for years and years and years, and he's never gotten anything out of it. So he has this whole thing about how, why has he been fighting all these years when he has gained nothing? Which is so, for someone like Napoleon, who you suspect has joined U.N.C.L.E. because of, and to some extent probably was involved in the Korean War because of some form of idealism where he thought he was doing the right thing, whether he was or not, because let's be serious, Korean War, not so good. But, the idea that, for him, well, of course you wouldn't gain anything out of being a soldier. That your job is to protect people. Your job is to protect ideals. And again, whether that's true or not. But for the Colonel, it's, almost this admission that even during the times that Napoleon saw him as a good man, and then Napoleon saw him as a hero, even then he was actually really looking for only his own gain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is the episode where okay, sorry.
It's also interesting that Ilya is involved in the whole affair because he obviously doesn't. I mean, I don't think that he likes the color a lot.
No.
And obviously, in the Korean War, Ilya would be on the other side.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's an interesting episode to think about. Maybe not as much to watch. But...
Yeah, this is an episode that should be way better in theory than it actually is.
Yeah, I agree.
I feel like, again, there's a lot that's going on in this episode that's unsaid. And I feel like if you're watching Ilya through this episode, even though he actually has, way less lines than Napoleon, it takes on a very, there's almost a second story going on with Ilya. And I feel like that idea that, he has been put in a situation that he was not expecting and that is very uncomfortable for him. Mm-hmm. The idea that Napoleon might be like, yeah, we're gonna go meet an old friend of mine. We're gonna go to some, other country. And Ilya is like, sure, I'll come along. And then, finding out that, not only is the old friend a Korean War vet, but also that they're helping him to possibly, change or undermine the government system of a country. That's real imperialist. And I feel like there's definitely an idea that Ilya would be chafing against this.
Definitely.
So I guess this episode is more interesting to rewatch than to watch for the first time. Maybe because once you have all these things in your mind, it gets more thought-provoking.
Yeah. I definitely want to rewatch it because I've only seen it once, and I think that I did not catch a lot of this, and I think that I would find much more value rewatching it after having this discussion.
Yeah, maybe because it's an interesting episode. But also, let's actually talk about what happens in the episode and not what we thought about.
Ilya meows.
Here's the cat
Ilya
boy.
says nya nya.
Nya nya.
There's a scene in which they're trying to distract someone inside a building with an open window, and Ilya just crouches on the no, he doesn't even crouch. He gets down on his hands and knees. It's weirder than crouching. He gets down on his hands and knees underneath the window and is just meow. It's not even a good meow. And a man leans out the window to see what's going on, and Napoleon performs a complete video game stealth maneuver and just pulls the guy out of the window, and he's like, oh, I'm unconscious now.
Yeah. It feels like half of the half of the attacks in Man from U.N.C.L.E. are just video game stealth moves, and they just get knocked out in 2 seconds.
100%.
Man from U.N.C.L.E is a video game.
Yeah.
The stealth, not the stealth school, the survival school that they go to in that Uncle candidates go to in Man from U.N.C.L.E is 100% teaching you how to be Solid Snake.
Yeah.
Speaking of snakes, and speaking of snakes in boxes.
Oh god! Okay, the logistics behind that made my brain explode. Like, so there's this one scene where, like, Napoleon's trying to go through the secret passageway, and there's this closed gate door on it. It's kind of like a cage door, and he sees a box where it says you could open it, and he's like, it can't be that easy. Like, it's just right there. You can just reach and grab it. And of course, he goes and reaches and puts his finger in there, and there's a venomous snake in there. And the snake, fortunately, only gets the venom on Napoleon's watch, so he's fine. But Napoleon does eventually get in because he finds this hidden bar above the door that he uses to poke open the thing inside the box and not get touched by the snake. But when I was watching this, the logistics of how they keep that snake alive just made my brain just be like, what is happening? Like, do they have a snake rotation, or they just they have shifts for the snakes, and then they feed them, do other stuff for them, when they're not in the box? Like, how do they even keep that snake alive? It can't stay in there all the time.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
I mean, the Man from U.N.C.L.E is a video game.
Yup. Yup. Yeah, it's you have to get past the snake in the box. Find an object you can use to get past the snake in the box.
Yeah.
It's very funny. Napoleon refers to the snake as Charlie, I think. And I really appreciate that. I think Charlie is a good name for a snake.
As we told in one of the previous episodes, Napoleon would run a meme account.
Yeah.
So, the actual most iconic scene in this episode is the one in which Napoleon and Ziya were supposed to go to a meeting place, I guess. I mean, they were supposed to get out of the town, but instead Napoleon is like, nope, I'm going to go and save Eden. And she's like, and you will risk the entire mission to save one man? And Napoleon is like, yes, it would be very unprofessional of me, but then I'm not perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
He got that Ilya weakness.
It's very interesting because I think actually in a lot of ways this kind of feels like an episode in which they get a little bit of a relationship upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
Because before this episode, I would say that the two of them definitely, they rush to save each other, etc. But there isn't quite the same, open disdain for the mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because when Ilya first gets kidnapped, it's when Napoleon is with the Colonel, and Napoleon's about to go back, and the Colonel tells him not to, and Napoleon obeys.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not until later, when the Colonel is gone, that Napoleon's like, no, never mind, I'm getting Ilya back. And it feels like kind of a turning point in terms of, Napoleon's... the way he relates to his job versus his partner.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And there was also a very gay scene later in which Napoleon goes to the president's, or who was he? I don't know. To the country's leader house, and he's like, you have something that belongs to me.
Yup. It's very interesting because all of the super gay things Napoleon does in this episode, he does when Ilya can't see them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Napoleon's being all possessive.
I mean, when you watch the show for the first time, it's such a big deal.
Yeah,
like
because
in the right order, because it never happened before.
Yeah. I think that because there's a combination of the line with the, you have something that belongs to me, which is to say Ilya, but then also the president says, well, what if he's already dead? He's, trying to kind of play devil's advocate here. And Napoleon's response is, then so are you. And it's a very interesting, like, Napoleon usually doesn't just come out and be like, I will do a murder to you. But, like, when it comes to the idea that someone could have hurt Ilya in that way, like, he's willing to enact that kind of revenge, even though, like, he would definitely be fired from U.N.C.L.E if he did that.
But he wouldn't care.
Yeah.
Ilya is above U.N.C.L.E for Napoleon. I think this definitely might have been like the turning point for that too, because it's like I remember like in the very early U.N.C.L.E episodes where Napoleon is like, "I'll do anything for my chief," and I'm just like, I really think that's starting to fall apart at this point.
Yeah, which I've talked a little bit. I've brought up the idea that I feel like the last like 2 episodes of the series really kind of get into the idea that like there is something to be said for questioning your loyalty for that kind of organization, except that then the series is canceled.
Yeah.
But this feels like sort of an early seed of that idea, same as the shark affair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's good stuff.
And we also brought it up when we were discussing the DouBlE affair, because it was like an episode in which they went to help Clara without getting a permission from U.N.C.L.E.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I guess they already started prioritizing other things, especially each other.
All good cop shows. I know this is not exactly a cop show, but all good cop shows eventually have to get to a point where they have to be questioning the fact that they're cop shows. Like, if you have characters who are, like, likable, just people, and they are part of a system that will ask you repeatedly to do violence in the name of justice, but not necessarily the actual pursuit of justice, eventually those characters are going to chafe against that system.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it would, of course, happen in the second half of season 4.
Yes. The second half of the apocryphal second half of season 4, in which Napoleon and Ilya have to come to terms with what it means to be, soldiers for a government organization.
The season of angst.
Indeed. Not that season 4 isn't already the season of angst.
Yeah. My favorite season. Sometimes, not always. It really depends on the mood, because sometimes season 3 is legitimately my favorite season.
Yeah. I have a soft spot for season 3 as well.
Yeah. Like that milk scene in the Suburbia affair,
I feel like for me, one of the things I really like about this show, and I feel like this is something I like a lot about a lot of older television, is that it doesn't actually stay totally consistent in tone. So, like, there are episodes that are really silly, and then there are other episodes that are really serious. And I feel like that is something that's something that's been lost in a lot of modern storytelling, because there's this idea that you need to keep the tone consistent, but on top of that, the idea that every episode needs to advance, quote, the plot. And when your episodes don't need to advance the plot, you're free to be like, you know what, this one's gonna be a silly one. And that's like, it's nice, it's refreshing when you get to something like that.
I guess it still happens in sitcoms. Like, in sitcoms, you sometimes have very different tones, and the plot doesn't get forward all the time. So
Yeah.
that's why I love sitcoms.
I feel like on the downside of a lot of sitcoms is like they do definitely not they don't have the same adherence to the plot or like slavishness to the plot that a lot of serial storytelling has, but unfortunately I feel like they often don't get to the same depths either.
Yeah, but there are good sitcoms that actually do so. Like, some of them are very good, I guess. And yeah, what I wanted to point out is that when I watched The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in its entirety, I was like, wow, you almost don't need fic in the show because, like, it already has everything. It has crack, it has angst.
Yeah. All the genres of fic are represented in every episode at some point.
Like this is like one of the few shows where I can say that it has some canonical crack episodes.
And the quality is pretty okay as well. So
yeah.
It's a good show. I love it so much.
It's a good show.
Yeah.
And even as I watched these 2 episodes that weren't the greatest, I still found some value in them.
Same.
So it was a fun time rewatching them, I would say.
I would agree.
I would like to ask Logan what he thought about it.
I actually, I feel like I really missed a lot of the things that you pointed out in the Secret Scepter affair, probably because it was my first time watching it. So I really missed a lot of that really interesting nuance you talked about, and I definitely really want to rewatch it because I think I would get a lot more out of it. I didn't really have much to contribute because I just didn't really catch a lot of things you did because I think, as you said, it's one of those episodes where it's more interesting when you rewatch it than when you watch it for the first time.
Yeah, I guess.
And meanwhile, the Yellow Scarf affair, I just was confused.
Everyone is confused about the Yellow Scarf affair.
It just makes no sense. It's a bad episode. But it's at least it had a dead parrot.
I appreciated Simpson. I didn't remember him from the first time watching the Yellow Scarf affair, but I dug him. I feel like I could write a short, crack fic about Simpson being sad about Napoleon.
Oh yeah, he's crying over his Napoleon shrine in his room.
I actually noticed Simpson being like that when I watched it for the first time, and I was completely confused by the fandom never mentioning him ever. Like, everybody knows the teen, everybody knows the sexy rat who will appear later, but nobody speaks about Simpson. I guess he's the ultimate, underrated character.
Yeah.
Because
I feel like
nobody likes him, including Napoleon.
It's like the recurring gag in Monsters Inc. where the Mike Wazowski keeps getting his face cut off in like every picture that's taken. Like that's Simpson. Like there's a picture of like every thrush agent who like tries to seduce Napoleon, and like the price tag is over Simpson's face.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need more Simpson appreciation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, getting back to this Secret Scepter, I would like to talk about the cast again because it's interesting. I think most people who play the Middle Eastern characters had blue eyes. It was very unusual to see,
Yeah.
I guess. They had, like, black hair and blue eyes. I mean, it definitely happens in real world because there are people like that in Middle East, but it's also pretty unusual and again interesting.
Yeah.
Some
Yeah, like,
some of the characters looked kind of Russian to me. I mean, they, especially like there was an officer who looked pretty Russian to me, who had like blue eyes and stuff. Um, and it reminded me of the fact that Omar Sharif was cast as Dr. Zhivago in that film by David Lee, and Omar Sharif is obviously an Egyptian actor, and he played a Russian character. It was an interesting time, I guess. The 60s.
Yeah.
I gotta say, I absolutely adore Amar Sharif because he was a great actor, and he was great in Dr. Zhivago. But it's interesting that, like, people saw Middle Eastern people similar to Russian, I guess.
So, as far as I know, in terms of like casting decisions, and also thinking about other movies from both earlier in the same time period, there was definitely a weird sort of thought that, like, for example, like Hispanic and Indian and other Asian actors were kind of interchangeable. But weirdly, it kind of seemed like Middle Eastern actors were often considered interchangeable with specific kinds of white actors. So
yeah,
Italians
like,
or Greeks or
Rudolph Valentino.
Mm-hmm. And,
being the Sheik, yeah.
And I feel like often those groups were considered sort of interchangeable within one another, too. Like, so many of the movies of the 1940s that were about Italian gangsters, like, they were played by Jewish actors.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting thinking about, like, why is it that one non-white group was kind of lumped in with other sort of, like, now considered white ethnicities, and yet other non-white groups were like lumped in with other. I don't know. It's just interesting where those divisions came from.
Yeah, but again, like the concept of whiteness is completely American because in Russia we view like people differently because we have this very antiquated understanding of like 3 or 4 races. And basically, there are people who are European, Asian, and African, and that's it.
Yeah.
So, and also Australian natives, obviously, because they are like different. They are separate from all the other races in Russian understanding. I mean, so basically. When I think of Middle Eastern people, they are mixed in my understanding, you know? They're not quite European, not quite Asian.
What's really interesting
is like where the Middle East is.
Yeah.
But like something that's interesting is that like Middle Eastern people often are like not considered white in the United States on like a everyday basis, but according to like really technical like census stuff, like Middle Eastern people are considered white, but then like in everyday life they often aren't, and it's really weird.
Part of that also is at least due to post 9/11 jingoism.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Because before that, I think Arabic people were considered as like harmless by the USA, I guess.
I feel like there was also, at least to some extent, more of a, or less of just a hyper-awareness of who was Middle Eastern. Like, I feel like there was an idea that it's like, oh, they're, you know, I don't know how to describe it, but I do feel like the hyper-awareness of being Middle Eastern is something that I feel like has happened within my lifetime. I don't feel like that was the case really necessarily before 9/11, but because the United States policy became so much about punishing people for being Middle Eastern, it became something that was brought to the forefront of many white Americans' consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why now it feels like they're less white than they used to be, I guess.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Because, again, whiteness is a social construct, and
yeah.
It's not a real thing.
Yeah, considering how, like, the concept of what is considered a race and what is not differs depending on the culture. Like, I've learned about, like, Russian racial ideas also because I'm taking my Russian class right now, and, like, my Russian professor has talked about it. And it's like I'm realizing that, like, the concept of what is considered a race really depends on the culture.
Absolutely, yeah. And I got to address the fact that I am Eastern Asian and I live in Russia, so I'm technically Russian, but also I'm not ethnically Russian. And when I watch Chinese media, there's a lot of Chinese supremacy in it, and it's very tempting to be like, yes, Asians. So I kind of understand why people are racist when they live in European Caucasian-centered countries, I guess, because when you see your representation everywhere, you're like, yeah, of course, I'm better than everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually really interesting to think about and makes a lot of sense. I've never considered this before.
So basically, I guess if I lived in a country that was mostly Asian, my opinion would also differ. So, I live in a country that's very European centered. So I have pretty European mentality, I would say.
Well, I mean, it's a bit like how, unfortunately, the fact that so much American media is consumed in so many countries, leading to things like even just colorism in places where it is majority non-white. So, in countries where there are actually not very many white people, the idea that, still you want to be the lightest version of the kind of person you are. And part of that coming from, Western beauty ideals.
For me, even using the word white sounds kind of icky, because have you seen Asians? I mean,
oh yeah.
Asian people, especially who live in the north, mostly are the same color.
Yep.
Yeah, they can be pretty pasty too.
So, basically, as an American, I always found the word white weird and phrases like person of color too, because what color am I?
But also, it kind of sucks though, because white is weird for that reason, but then Caucasian is weird too, because that also can mean people from Georgia and Armenia.
Yeah,
so you're just what?
Caucasian also has a lot of racial baggage in terms of where the term came from. The guy who invented that term was a eugenicist.
I also get that the Russian theory is pretty outdated, I guess, but at the same time, I find it easier to digest. That people can be not even European, but Europeoid. So, it's fine.
Actually, I have to say, when my Russian teacher, or like my Russian professor, said some of the racial terms that are used in Russian, my brain thought it was a slur.
Yeah, I mean, this sounds very bad, and I'm not gonna say the most.
Yeah, like literally my brain went into alarm bells mode because I was like, that sounds like you're like a eugenicist from the 1890s.
Because that's where it came from, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, I feel like the thing that's very difficult when we're talking about any sort of racial theory is that you have to be able to hold in your mind simultaneously the idea that race is a construct, and yet it does affect people's lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can't not talk about it, but at the same time, talking about it is very difficult.
Yep. I'm a 6th grade teacher. I talk about this with 11-year-olds.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
And it's very different in Russia because they have completely different understanding of these things. So.
Yep.
I know this is not strictly Man from U.N.C.L.E. related, but I'm still really glad we had this conversation because it's really important.
I mean, we could say that it's related to Man from U.N.C.L.E. because it has so many different people in it.
I feel like
Ilya
Man from U.N.C.L.E. is. Sorry.
Ilya is supposed to be Russian, so I guess it's like, what would his perspective be like?
And I feel like also when you're talking about media from a past era that made an attempt to be racially, ethnically, nationally diverse, you have to unpack these things because even when it tried, it didn't always succeed. And I think that we would be doing a disservice to pretend that these things aren't there, because it is a show that is making an attempt at diversity, but it often is not doing so very well. And I feel like it's interesting because in some ways it's a show that has actually aged very well, and then in other ways it's a show that has really not aged well at all. And I think unless you can talk about those things, I don't think you can really recommend the show to people, because you need to make sure that they're prepared to know what they're getting into.
Yeah. I know some people have a really hard time getting into old media for that reason. So because they aren't prepared for it, and like they aren't prepared for the differences and attitudes that would be present at that time, and they just don't want to deal with it. So, but then it's still really important to see how things were in the past, even if they're less than ideal, because then we can see where we've come from.
And I feel like it's always important to mention that the Man from U.N.C.L.E. was actually one of the better shows.
Yep. And I think that's important to think about too, in terms of also the popularity of original Star Trek, and how fandom as a whole forgets that Star Trek was not the first real quote fandom, that in a lot of ways Man from U.N.C.L.E. actually was. And
or even Sherlock, or even if you want to go further back, Sherlock Holmes. But
I mean in
Man
terms
from
of
U.N.C.L.E.
TV fandom.
And that makes sense.
So the idea that that idealistic society in which we, as the Vulcans do, celebrate infinite diversity and infinite combinations, that it actually did have a precedent. And that, I think that most of the time original Trek does a little bit better with making sure that they're casting actors as people of the ethnicity they're playing, etc. It also often stumbles on that. And I think the fact that this show was popular beforehand made it so that they could do that, and that they knew that they had an audience that was kind of built in for, like, people who were ready in some ways to, like, live in a world where we were not all where the audience was not all white all the time.
Yeah, and again, like, I said it before, I think, but maybe not on this podcast, that for me, what I consider really racist is when people act like all people of the nation, or like most of them, are bad, right? And you very rarely see it in the month from Uncle. Mostly it's like when people of some other ethnicity are present, most of them are good people. Some of them can be villains, and it's like, okay. As a message,
I feel like also interestingly, it's often the nicest people and the people who are like the most sensible, whole, rounded characters with like real hopes and dreams and personalities who are played by actual non-white actors, whereas it's often the white actors pretending to be non-white who play the villains.
Yeah. It's also an interesting point because Deirdre was played by an actual Indian actress, and Maharaja was obviously not.
Yep.
And in the Scepter, there's also like Ziya is also played by an actual person from Middle East, so she's a good one. And like other people, I mean, I haven't looked at the pages, but I don't know.
I mean, the most evil character is the Colonel, who's just white, and then the other most evil character is the evil mom, and she is played by an actress who is not even trying to pretend not to be white, even though she's not supposed to be. It's like the Queen Mother being like super evil.
She's like a British lady.
Yeah. It is very interesting.
And I also want to point out that in season 1 especially, there was almost always at least 2 female characters. One of them was good, one of them was evil. It's an interesting, like, almost a quota, I guess, because it's... I mean, you don't even see it in modern shows, actually.
No.
Like... in the Yellow Scarf, there was obviously Deirdre, who was a very major character in that episode, and there was also Sita, who was murdered.
In a carpeted bathroom.
And in Scepter, there's like Ziya and the mother of the president or whoever he was, I don't remember.
The mother of the president.
And again, like, it's an older lady who plays a villain. It's interesting to watch. I have not much to say.
Yeah, and thinking again about the beginning of Yellow Scarf with the older uncle agent woman, and the fact that, like, the very implication that Uncle employs women who are of, like, post-married age is actually, like, amazing. Because, you know, the thought was still in the 60s often that, like, okay, yeah, it was fine for women to work up until the point they got married. And so...
and also, like, I have to say, like, she actually makes a point to say, like, so, like, the Duncan McAllister calls her Miss, and then she makes a point to say Mrs. So, like, you can still be married, and you can be married and still do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We should also be writing fan fiction about this woman.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, she's awesome.
So our conclusion would be that the show is good, but it also fails sometimes. But it tried.
Yeah, you know that meme with like the yellow star with the "you tried" and Comic Sans on it. Yeah.
Sometimes she said,
I feel like a lot of the time it gets better than a "You Tried" star, but these two episodes might be "You Tried" stars.
And that's why we chose to speak about them instead
together.
Of like
yeah.
Similar vibes. Similar offensive vibes.
But they still are like worth watching if you're into the Man from Uncle. So, any other thoughts?
No, I think I'm feeling like we've got covered pretty much everything.
Except for the fake bear.
Oh my god, we totally forgot about the fake bear.
Oh my god, the bear! It's like how in like the reason why we say the word bear and not the original English term for the word bear is that it's such a taboo to say the original word for bear that we just that English speakers just kept saying bear instead. The bear taboo is still with us.
Yeah, I am so lost. The bear taboo. What?
Yeah.
Logan, explain.
So, I'm a linguistics major, and the in English, like the original English word for bear actually stopped being used because it had, if you said there was a taboo that if you said the original English word for bear, it would summon a bear and you have to deal with it and stuff. Because this was back in the days when bears were a big deal and you were actually really scared of them all the time. So instead they started saying the ancestor of the word bear as the substitute word. It's basically it was such a taboo saying the original word for bear that the word bear overtake it, and now we don't even I don't even know if we know the original word for bear anymore.
Wow.
We might, but I don't know.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. So in this episode, the bear that they are attacked by is the physical version of replacing the word bear with the word bear.
Yeah. Well, I was trying to say that, this is probably, this is a really crappy metaphor.
I get what it is.
But we didn't talk about the bear, even though it's right there. So maybe yeah.
I actually googled the word, and it seems to be something like arcto.
Oh yeah,
you know you're gonna have a bear in your house now, right?
Oh no! Here it comes. No, I think we should bring it back as a joke for gay people.
So this bear that is the taboo for a bear physically it's the worst taxidermy on the planet. And someone is someone is standing behind this thing shaking it, and that's what they're using to get it to be a bear rather than just a still taxidermy. But it does not look like a bear, it does not move like a bear, and they keep doing a weird thing where they slow the camera down whenever they're looking at it, and it's why is this bear so cursed?
Yeah, it's I don't remember even if they ever got it in focus, because it's they knew it was very bad and they tried not really show it.
They didn't want us to see the bear.
Yeah, it's too taboo.
Also, Napoleon 100% just lets a guy get mauled to death by the bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Napoleon, okay? Napoleon doesn't care. It reminds me of a scene in the gazebo in the Maze Affair. But we'll get to it later.
Yeah, there's people who get mauled to death by wolves in that one. Although those wolves are clearly just like friendly dogs.
Yeah.
Whereas this is like from someone's basement.
But Napoleon is basically like, whatever.
Oh, Nappy.
Oh no, Bill.
Nappy. Call me Nappy.
Yeah. I'm looking in my screenshots if I have any footage of the bear. And it's like behind like what's it called?
It's behind like a cage door.
Yeah, and that's all you can see, I think.
Mm-hmm. They don't show the bear close because it's a very bad bear.
Yeah.
Cursed bear. There was also a funny moment in this like scene when Napoleon just puts his hand on his shoulder and doesn't say anything.
Yeah,
Aww.
it's cute.
Yeah.
Napoleon also 100% lets that guy be mauled to death by a bear because of Ziya.
I think we're losing it after that really deep conversation about the ramifications of race and media and society. Now we're just talking about shitty taxidermy bears and Napoleon being absolutely terrible.
It's not a good episode of our podcast if we don't lose money.
I feel like it is very in character for us to end with a lot of screaming about bears. Well, thank you all for bearing with us. You've been with us for so long. We've really been clawing our way through these 2 episodes.
Wow.
But the terrible truth is that we have to go now.
It's actually very impressive.
My greatest skill is puns. Well.
I mean, we are living in the pandemic. What else would
It's always a pandemic when I'm around.
That's what I was
And on that note, should we go?
Yeah, so the next time we will be discussing the Mad Tea Party affair, and it will be a lot of fun, and I think it's not racist.
I don't remember that one being racist.
Yeah. So, see you next time.
See you next time.
Yeah. Thank you for listening. Bye.
Signing out.